The GameCube was my very first game console. I love the Nintendo GameCube. The GameCube originally came out back in September of 2001. That is 23 years ago. It's crazy to think about. I, of course, didn't start playing it until like 2005 when I was about 4 or 3 years old. So it wasn't necessarily something I have a lot of memories of, but I would come to cherish the ones I do have. And the GameCube is so interesting because it was one of Nintendo's least successful consoles of all time. But now that the generation that grew up playing the GameCube now just has such a deep love for the system and has become one of the most cult classic game consoles that we've ever seen. The GameCube was originally unveiled in August of 2000, day before Space World 2000. That's when the company officially unveiled the end results of the Project Dolphin that was talked about back in 1999. When Nintendo originally unveiled the GameCube, they unveiled it with the original 5 colors: purple, black, silver, gold, and magenta. However, though, it would later replace magenta and gold with just orange. At the same event, Nintendo would also unveil the Game Boy Advance, which is just crazy to think about. Nintendo held off showing off both their next home console and the next Game Boy from E3 and waited to host it at their own event in Japan. At Space World 2000, we even saw demos of games that we would eventually see become fully fleshed out. Games like Luigi's Mansion, which would become a launch title for the system, Metroid, and Star Wars Rogue Leader 2, and even Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess was shown in sort of a demo that would inspire that game. It's a whole thing. That's a video for another time. Overall reception of the GameCube at the time was very excited and hopeful for what the GameCube could be, but it clearly had sort of a tinge of doubt because of how poorly received the N64 was towards the end of its life. Now that we've established the early history of the GameCube, what is my history with the GameCube? As I said before, I really didn't start playing the GameCube until it was like 2005, 2006. I was basically about 3 or 4 years old when I first started to play video games, and my first console was the GameCube. I have so many memories playing the GameCube. For example, playing Battle for Bikini Bottom, one of my favorite SpongeBob games. It's just a truly fantastic game. And there are so many other games that I played like that, or that were like movie tie-in games or show tie-ins that sort of haven't really been all that popular in recent years. One that comes to mind was a weird GTA clone for the Cars the Movie video game. Crazy concept, but it was sort of weird. All I remember is having a very similar GTA style minimap and just driving around Route 66 aimlessly. I can't for the life of me remember how the game is played or why I played it or where I even got it from, but I just have all these memories of me just aimlessly driving around trying to figure out how the game functions, but not ever figuring it out because I was 4 years old and just angry. Playing Mario Kart was another one of my favorite things to do. Mario Kart Double Dash ostensibly was my very first Mario Kart, and it is truly one of the best Mario Kart games on the GameCube. And being able to play that and look back at it with such fondness is something a lot of us have in common with the GameCube. There's so many of us that were just really young at the time and just played these games and would later have, just the deep fondness for the GameCube that many others at the time simply wouldn't have. One of my favorite games that I played on the GameCube was Lego Star Wars the Movie. And that was the first video game on the GameCube that I could truly say was mine, and I have memories of me going into GameStop and getting it. It was like 2007 or 8, and it was such a fun video game. And I remember at the same time of getting that game, I got a GameStop branded GameCube controller because I constantly broke controllers. Don't know how, but I did. And just, it was such a fun game and so many fond memories that would lead me to becoming a massive fan of Lego Star Wars and Star Wars in general. Because whenever I couldn't play with the Lego sets or watch the movies, I would play the video game. Specifically, like I mentioned, Lego Star Wars. It was my only way to sort of attach myself to this franchise that at the time I had very limited access to. Now that I've established my history with the GameCube, some of my fondest memories and what I predominantly played, how did it all fail? Nintendo was poised at this time to really launch something truly amazing, with it being technically one of the most powerful game consoles at the time. So how did Nintendo squander all of that potential? First off, using mini DVDs or mini CDs doesn't help, limiting the game capacity to 1.5 gigabytes when the competition could hold upwards of 7 gigabytes, depending on the model of the disc. Limiting the storage capacity of these games made it so that if you wanted to play games Final Fantasy X or even games like Shadow of the Colossus would require multiple discs to work, which just wasn't feasible. I remember back during the N64 times, if you wanted to put Final Fantasy VII on the N64, it would require like over 50 N64 cartridges just to hold the data. While technically N64 being more powerful than the PS1 by a large margin, severely bottlenecked by the capacity of the discs. That one limitation drastically changes the amount of game data you can put in the discs. Like, that capacity is so important for environmental data, AI for the sort of the computer controlled characters. It is so many small things that need to be put into the discs that truly have a massive expansive world, like in Shadow of the Colossus, or even on simpler games like in Sly Cooper. Even though you don't need all that data space for those kinds of games sometimes, it is nice to be able to have that sort of breathing room to build larger and more intricate worlds. GameCube just simply couldn't hold enough data for larger scaled games. Another reason why the GameCube failed was the loss of Rare. Microsoft purchased Rareware back in the early 2000s, and Nintendo lost one of their closest developers that was almost near functionally a first-party developer, but still remained just a very close, like, sort of second-party developer. And with Rare leaving, they lost one of the larger supporters that they had back during the N64 era. Rareware gave them Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie, Conker's Bad Fur Day, GoldenEye, just massive titles that were poised to make sequels and poised to have just a even larger presence on Nintendo platforms, but Nintendo lost their opportunity to purchase Rareware, and they lost it to Microsoft, where Rareware would almost suffer the most throughout the years, because what has Rareware done since then? Absolutely nothing, and it's sad because they have amazing back catalogs that aren't being utilized efficiently that Nintendo could have done so much with at the time. Another possible reason why the GameCube failed was just poor launch titles. It released with not a traditional mainline Mario game. It launched with Luigi's Mansion, which at the time wasn't sort of a big name in terms of the gaming space. It's a new franchise, and it was starring not Mario. And stuff like that led people to believe Nintendo wasn't putting their best foot forward. And as the generation went on, they became so reliant on their first-party titles that it basically stifled all chances that third parties had. And we did have third-party support, like Resident Evil came to the system in becoming one of the best Resident Evil games ever, even seeing remakes of the original Resident Evil games from the PS1, which people still laud as one of the best remakes of all time. Another reason why the GameCube failed, it was just overall missing online games. Sure, there was stuff like Phantasy Star Online and even, I believe, some sort of online Final Fantasy game, but it just didn't have that large-scale, first-person shooter games like it did on the Xbox. Because of how young the GameCube eventually would, sort of target itself to, it just lacked any incentive for older audiences to pick it up. With little to no online infrastructure and just missing those sort of first-person experiences, Nintendo sort of didn't really have the audience that they needed to survive that generation. I think one of the most crucial ones that they missed out on was the installation of a DVD player. There was a model of the GameCube that included a sort of a DVD player sort of thing in it called the Panasonic Q, which is just a GameCube made by Panasonic that had a DVD player sort of inside of it also. A massive reason why the PS2 was so successful was the fact that it had a pre-installed DVD player, which at the time was kind of an expensive thing to own. And being able to acquire a DVD player at such a cheap price compared to other full-size DVD players just made it a no-brainer. I know some people who bought PS2s purely because it had a DVD player in it, and that's a huge market that Nintendo lost out on. So while all those people might not necessarily be buying games, they were buying PS2s though. And like the grandkids would come over and see they have a PS2 and then be able to buy games for it, and they would play games. It's sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy, a very cyclical sort of experience that many people had. But in the end, it's almost thanks to Nintendo's less than stellar ability to capitalize on what the N64 taught them and not even really realize the potential of the GameCube in its entirety that led to people really having this cult following for the device. With Nintendo's over-reliance on first parties, we got some of Nintendo's best games of all time. Games like Smash Bros. Melee, Metroid Prime 1 and 2, Super Mario Sunshine, Pikmin, and even games like Animal Crossing. Like, Nintendo really did a lot of experimenting with the software side of things on the GameCube. And it's stuff like that that really left an impression on people. That's why people still hold Super Smash Bros. Melee tournaments to this day. This is why people want to mod, HDMI outputs onto GameCubes. It's why people collect these things. It's because of the passion Nintendo had for their first-party titles. Even if that's what drove some third parties away, it still kept a very core tight audience that all could relate to each other. If you meet a fellow GameCube owner at the time, you probably had some of the same games. You shared a lot of the same experiences. Even though the GameCube was a failure, it still lives close to many gamers' hearts, and it's a console that we won't ever forget. So what are your thoughts? This is my first sort of retrospective style video. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. All that other social media garbage down below. And last but not least, have a wonderful day.